In today's lesson, we will be building Greebles or Nurnies, which could also be cities. And we're going to be doing this using textures. We're going to start off by creating a plane. Box or Shift X. Let's draw out a plane. We'll make it 10 meters by 0 height and a depth of 10. And we'll 0 that there. Press Escape to get rid of that highlight there and drop the tool with the spacebar. Excellent. Pretty straightforward. We'll copy that and we're going to paste that into layer 2. Now we're going to subdivide this a few times. So Shift D to bring up the subdivide options. Go to faceted, OK, and we're going to do this a couple of times. We don't want to go overboard. That should be plenty. I'm going to give this a new surface to make it easier to select later. So let's call this blocks. Okay, I'm going to press T and I'm just going to raise it off the floor a little bit. Finger on the control button to constrain the axis to the Y. So it's just above the base so we can see what's going on. Before we continue though, just an honourable little mention to this use texture button here. If we select that and click on the texture button here, we could use an image map, but we could also use this procedural texture, and we've got a whole library of lovely procedurals to choose from. By using different textures, playing around with the scale and positions, you can quite quickly build up an interesting looking landscape. But obviously the downside to this technique is we're going blind a little bit. We can't actually see what the texture's doing. So this is why we're not using this route. So let's turn this off and undo all of that. We're going to bounce over to the Map tab, and then we're going to go down here to Texture Point under the colour. So we'll click on that. We'll leave everything at its defaults. The VMap type is a weight map. And we can either create a weight map down here or we can do it here. So we're going to call this one again blocks and then click on the texture button. We can close that down then. We're nearly set up for this. Under the weight option here, we need to see the blocks weight map that we've just created. And in order to see that, we need to go to our weight shaded view. This works similar to as I showed earlier, but this generates weight maps. So if I jump over to the procedural texture, we can actually see what the weight map is doing. Let's set the texture value to 1 so we know we're going from 0 to 100% if you like. As mentioned before, we've got a whole ton of procedural textures to choose from. I've picked this hybrid multifactorial. You may like the general scale, but you've got this gradient which you don't necessarily want. The way around that is to add a gradient above that layer. It defaults to previous layer, which is good. Put a keyframe in at 1. And then at start, the first keyframe where it says 0, we want that to be a value of 0. And we can tighten this gradient up just by dragging these sliders. We can turn this on and off, so let's turn it off for now and go back to our procedural texture. We're making Greebles and or Nurnies, so we want something slightly more geometrical. So for this, I'm going to use Maze. Now that's part of the R-Man collection. I'll put a link in the description below. The way to think about this is the orange sections are the areas that are raised and the non-shaded sections stay where they are. Okay, so I've had to play around with the settings. I've tried to avoid things with little holes in it or little pieces. I think that's looking pretty good. If you wanted it the opposite way around, obviously just hit the invert button. Okay, I'm feeling brave, so I'm going to close that down. And T for move, I'm making sure my fall off set to none and I haven't got that texture button selected. I'm just going to move that underneath the grid like that. Basically, so we're underneath our main plane in layer 1. Okay, still with the move tool selected and the weight map selected being the blocks, which is this weight map here. Under fall off, we're going to go to weight map. So this weight map is looking at this weight map. I'm going to hold my finger on the control button. I'm going to move the mouse up to constrain this to the Y. There we go. Don't have to move it up too far, but that's done the displacement nicely. The only tweak I am going to make to this is I'm going to flatten down these edges. So I'm going to select two of these outer points next to each other, hit the right arrow key, that should select the border, and then I'm going to expand that selection with the square bracket. 1, okay, and then I'm going to select one of these flatter points, and then I'm going to go to Modifier, Align, to last points Y. So that will flatten all those points to that last selected Y location. Deselect those points and let's go into poly shaded mode. We don't need to see the weight map anymore. So we'll go to layer 1, which is where we're going to apply our nurnies, and then we're going to put layer 2 into the background like that. Under the construction tab, we're going to look for solid drill. There it is. And for operation, we want stencil, but we want to choose that blocks color so we can select them easily later. So okay that, and that will give us this. That's okay, but perhaps I want a little bit more space between the blocks, so we'll undo that. We'll go back to this layer, remembering to remove the fall off. We're just going to move this down a little bit so there's a bit more space. So again, we're going to go to solid drill, stencil, block. That looks nice and clean, but if we look in wireframe mode, you'll see we've got a ton of points we don't want. That's easily dealt with. If we go up to reduce points, click on that. We don't have to touch anything, just okay that. And there they were, gone. Let's press W to bring up the statistics. Go over to polygon mode and surface blocks. That's why we stenciled the name into it, so that's easy enough. Let's hit B for bevel. Finger on the control key, we'll just move up a little bit. Right mouse click, and then we'll move in a bit. Let's change the surface name, so we'll go blocks 2. B on the keyboard for bevel again. Again, finger on the control key to constrain, and we'll just push up. That's good, but we want a variation here, so what I'm going to do under the plus and minus, I'm just going to play with that setting there. If you think of it in a different scale, we've kind of created a city block here. So that's one avenue you could possibly explore, but we're going for a smaller scale here, so I'm just going to knock that down. There we go. We could also go minus to push those polygons into the ground a little. Let's drop the bevel tool, but here's a handy thing to know. We've dropped all the selection. T for translate, under fall off, we'll select polygon. That basically means you can move a polygon at a time without having to select anything. So again, holding control to restrict to the Y, I'm just going to move up and down and tweak these upper polygons to whatever I feel. Okay, another super handy tool I found. Let's select a few of these. There's a free tool, I'll put a link in the description. It's called Jetto Bevel. So if we click on this, it's a very handy tool to have, especially for Lightwave users. It's very good at adding little bevels and segments. So that's definitely a tool worth investigating further as well. I've got a copy of Lightwave CAD. I think it's fantastic for adding details like this. I applied the exact same method to come up with a little city block as well. So it's a very versatile technique and it'll help you come up with shapes you wouldn't necessarily have thought of yourselves. A quick note on the render I made for the poster frame. I actually used 2 cutters on this one, just varied the parameters slightly for each, which gave me this. And as before, I just selected the cutter object surfaces and did a simple bevel, as I showed earlier. In terms of texturing, I reused that maze texture. That's what that looks like. Here are the settings. Use the black and white values to vary the specularity. I'm also using the bump for some extra detail in there. I thought I'd try the edge shader just to round off some of those sharp corners, and it seems to work really well. Finally, I'm filtering the Y distance using the world position, which used to be called world spot, and just varying the colour slightly based on their height. That will do for today. I hope there was something there of use. See you soon.